Galw'r cynulliad cenedlaethol I drefn. A'r eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni'r prynawn yma yw cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog. A'r cwestiwn cyntaf, Paul Davies.
Diolch Llywydd. Beth mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei wneud I gefnogi ffermwyr yn Sir Benfro?
Wel, mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn gweithio I gefnogi'r diwydiant ffermio yn Sir Benfro mwyn iddo dod yn fwy proffidiol, canaliadwy ac wrth gwrs sicrhau bod ffermwyr yn gwneud elw yn y pen draw.
Prif Weinidog, mae'r penderfyniad I adael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd yn mynd I gael effaith mawr ar y diwydiant amaethyddol, a mae'n bwysig nawr fod llywodraethau ar bob lefel yn gweithio gyda'i gilydd I gefnogi ein ffermwyr yn y dyfodol. Ond mae yna bryder enfawr ymysg ffermwyr yn Sir Benfro ar hyn o bryd o'r posibilrwydd o gyflwyno parthau perygl nitradau. Oherwydd penderfyniad pobl Prydain a Chymru I adael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd, gallwch chi ddweud wrthyn ni ble mae hyn yn gadael yr ymgynghoriad roedd eich llywodraeth chi'n golygu cyflwyno ar barthau perygl nitradau a di'r cynlluniau hyn nawr yn mynd mlaen?
Mae'n dal I barhau, wrth gwrs, wrth gofio'r ffaith bod y gyfraith amgylcheddol sydd wedi cael ei trosglwyddo I gyfraith Cymru mynd I aros bod y Deyrnas Unedig yn gadael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd. Byddai'n fater wedyn ni I Lywodraeth Cymru I benderfynu pa cyfreithiau I gadw yn y pen draw a pa cyfreithiau bydde ddim cael ei gadw yn y pen draw.
Eluned Morgan.
Mae nifer o ffermwyr yn Sir Benfro a Tu Hwnt yng Nghymru eisoes wedi arallgyfeirio I fewn I dwristiaeth. Yn sgil y pleidlais yma ar y referendum, ac mae Paul eisoes wedi sôn am ffaith bod gymaint o ansicrwydd nawr ymysg y ffermwyr, a fydd Llywodraeth Cymru yn gwneud fwy I hyrwyddo twristiaeth ac I annog fwy o ffermwyr I ddilyn y trywydd yna?
Wel, mae'n wedi dweud bod ni wedi cefnogi ffermwyr I wneud hynny dros y blynydde diwetha trwy cynlluniau fel cyswllt ffermio ar enghraifft a trwy'r cynllun datblygu gwledig. Mae'n bwysig dros ben bod ni'n sicrhau bod pob math, pob ffordd I wneud arian yn cael I roi o flaen ffermwyr mwyn sicrhau bod I ffermwyr nhw yn fwy canaliadwy.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd. Wel, un o'r cynrychiadau amaeth mwy adnabyddus Sir Benfro, un sydd yn fan o'r pallau naetoadau yma, yw Tatws wrth gwrs, a mae gan Tatws cynnar Sir Benfro PGI, statws PGI o dan y gyfundrefn bresennol Ewropeaidd sydd yn galluogi ffermwyr y cynhyrchu I gwerthu'r tatws fel rhywbeth arbennig a fel rhywbeth sy'n deillio o tirogaeth arbennig. Gan fod yn beth wy'n deall, mae'r PGI yn mynd llaw yn llaw gyda aelodaeth o'r Undeb Ewropeaidd, a oes gan y Llywodraeth gynlluniau neu unrhyw fwriad I gyflwyno rhywbeth tebyg I Gymru wrth adael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd.
Bydd yn holl bwysig. Mae'n ansicr ar hyn o bryd ynglyn â beth yw'r sefyllfa, ond os byddai PGI, status PGI yn cael ei golli, mae hwnna'n nid dim ond yn bwrw y tato yn Sir Benfro, ond cig o'n yn enwedig. Mae'r farchnad allforio cig o'n yn bwysig dros ben, a un o'r pethau sydd yn sicrhau bod ni'n gallu gwerthu ar draws y byd yw'r ffaith bod ni'n gallu rhoi gwarant I brynwyr bod y cig o'n yn dod o Gymru a bod y cig o'n o'r safon ucha. Mae'r un peth yn digwydd gyda tato, so felly sy'n ni yn colli PGI a PDO, statws PDO hefyd, bydd yr rhaid sicrhau bod gyda ni statws cyfartal yng Nghymru mwyn bod prynwyr yn gallu cael yr un hyder.
Cwestiwn 2, Julie Morgan.
Will the First Minister provide an update on funding for the Cardiff City deal?
Well, we remain committed to delivering a successful Cardiff Capital Region City deal. We have not yet had a response from the UK Government, however, in terms of them guaranteeing that the funding element of that deal that comes from European funds would be honoured by them. And that, of course, has a direct impact upon match funding for the City deal.
One of the key planks of the City deal is the Metro, which could transform transport services in South Wales and the valleys. As the First Minister has said, a sizable amount of the project money has not yet been signed off. What opportunity would the First Minister have to negotiate directly with Europe about continuation or obtaining the rest of that money?
Well, as things stand, as soon as the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, then access to that funding will end. Now I'm putting in place a team in Brussels to look at negotiating on Wales's behalf in parallel with the UK, with the European Commission. But if the European funding is not made up by the UK government, then clearly that leaves a hole in funding, and we will have to revise the plans that we currently have.
Neil McAvoy.
Diolch, Llywydd. Before I come to a question, I was heckled by you last week, and you audibly called me a coward. I would suggest in future you behave in a more private...
This is a question.
I would ask with respect,
please,
I would
Mr.
ask the
McAvoy.
First Minister to behave more like a First Minister.
Ask your question.
My question is coming now, but my statement remains. I've just chaired a conference on the City deal.
Ask your question.
I am asking my question with respect, Presiding Officer, if you let me. I've just chaired a conference on the City deal.
Ask your question, Mr. McAvoy.
I've just chaired a question.
I think we know by now that you've just chaired something. Tell us what it is and ask your question.
There were hundreds of delegates from the third sector, from government, yet there was only one person from a local business. My question is, why are local communities, why are local businesses not being included in the City deal? The small businesses are the backbone of this economy, and yet their voice is hardly heard. Why is that?
Well, if he chaired it, I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that very few businesses were there, I have to say. No, the reality is that businesses will be a hugely important part of the City deal, and we'll work with local authorities and businesses to make sure that the benefits of the deal can be maximised.
David Melding.
Minister, we've heard that the Metro deal is central to this whole concept, and unfortunately 2 weeks ago I think we realised there's a great gulf between areas like Cardiff and the Valleys areas to the north, and this was reflected in the voting pattern. And the Metro does give us a chance to integrate the economic future of these two very important parts of the South Wales economy.
I agree very much with that. The concept of the Metro is designed to do two things primarily. First of all, of course, to make it easier for those who have jobs in Cardiff to travel quickly into Cardiff, but also to attract investment away from the coast and further up the valleys. And to get rid of that perception that our Northern Valley communities are hard to reach. We know that's not true. We know with the road schemes that have been put in place already, we know that with the Metro scheme, that we will be able to say to investors that our valley communities are connected to the wider economy of South East Wales, and therefore they are communities that should be invested in. And we're beginning to see that the fruits of that with the investment decision by TVR.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau ac yn gyntaf wythnos yma arweinydd yr wrthblaid Leanne Wood.
Diolch yn fawr. First Minister, the Westminster political system is in crisis, with skullduggery and backstabbing going on in both the Conservative Party and your own party in London. And this has had a major effect on Wales and on our country's future. Would the First Minister be prepared to have a word with Welsh MPs to tell them to get a grip and to do their job, which is to hold the Conservative government to account and to make sure that Wales gets every single penny of the funds that we were promised in the event of a vote to leave the European Union?
Well, I'm not going to pretend to the leader of the opposition that things are stable at Westminster. That's there for all to see. But I can say, as far as we're concerned as a government, we will fight for every single penny that Wales is owed, and I am absolutely confident that all those who represent my party at Westminster will do the same.
First Minister, I'm disappointed that you're not prepared to show some leadership on this question. If you were not prepared to have a word with your own MPs, perhaps they're prepared to listen to this message from me. Voters in our constituencies want us to be their voice in this difficult time. They want us to tackle the racism that has risen in our communities. They want to get back to work, and they want to see us take our country forward. Now, the last thing they need right now is more division and more infighting. In a public meeting that I did last night in Aberystwyth, First Minister, I heard from a young man whose family has German background, and they are concerned about their future. They don't know what rights they will have. They're worried about reports in the press that their status might well be on the table in negotiations. Now, many children have been asking questions of their parents when they're in this situation, and parents are finding it very difficult to answer those questions when so much is unknown. Now, I hope that you can cover this more comprehensively in the urgent question later on, but we need to be clear that EU citizens are a net benefit to Wales. We should all say that every single one of them are welcome here and that they shouldn't have to leave this country if or when Brexit eventually takes place. First Minister, what reassurances can you give to people living in Wales from other parts of Europe that you will champion them, their rights and their families?
Well, in a way, that gives me the opportunity to answer the urgent question now, which I'm happy to do. I have written to the Home Secretary, and I have said to her that as far as the Welsh Government is concerned, we believe that EU citizens living in the UK should retain the right to do so after the UK withdraws from the EU. She and I are in the same position on that. I believe it's utterly wrong to use EU citizens living in the UK as a bargaining chip in negotiations. It makes it sound as if they are hostages. They are not hostages, they are welcome in Wales.
I thank you for that answer, First Minister. Now, in a different meeting that I attended yesterday in Cardiff, I heard from a representative of one of the sectors that will be heavily affected by the Brexit vote. We were told that the further education and skills sector could lose £760 million of future funding if that money isn't replaced. If and when that funding doesn't materialise, the young people who are most affected will be those who are furthest away from the employment market. That's just one sector of Welsh civic society, and it shows how important our EU membership is and the benefits that are there and that they shouldn't just be discarded. Do you agree with me that those voices from civic society deserve to be heard when the Brexit terms are negotiated? And will you draw up an official Welsh negotiating position to be agreed by this National Assembly and sent to the incoming UK Prime Minister? And if you were unable to hold the new Tory leader in Westminster to account for the promises that were made in the EU referendum campaign, can you tell us how those apprenticeship places, the training courses, the back-to-work schemes that are currently benefiting some of the most disadvantaged people in some of the most disadvantaged communities in Wales will be available to those people in the future?
Well, first of all, she's right to point out the funding gap that would exist. Secondly, she and I have discussed the issue of what the negotiating stance should be, but I'm quite happy to share it with the Chamber. That is, firstly, that we will explore every possible avenue of benefit to Wales. Secondly, I've already asked the Economy Secretary to announce a series of measures to protect jobs and maintain economic confidence and stability, and he has produced that. Yesterday, the Environment and Rural Affairs Secretary and I met key figures from Wales's environment and agriculture and fisheries sectors to discuss the implications of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. But I have to say that there is a duty on those who called for the UK to leave the EU to ensure that the promises that they made in terms of funding for Wales are honoured. I have to say that the evidence of that now is getting thinner by the day. The question is, were the Welsh public told the truth before the referendum, or is the truth emerging now?
Arweinydd Grŵp UKIP, Neil Hamilton.
I'm sure the First Minister is aware that there is no question of EU citizens currently living or working in the United Kingdom being used as bargaining chips in any renegotiation because their rights are fully protected under the 1969 Vienna Convention. Can the First Minister confirm to me that that is the case?
Well, I can only quote what the Foreign Secretary has said, and indeed the person who might yet become the Prime Minister, who has said that those rights are not guaranteed. Now, we need to have clarity, and there needs to be a response from the current Home Secretary as quickly as possible in order that people can have assurance that for many people who have lived in the UK for many, many years, that they will not find their rights of residence removed. That clarity is essential.
Well, turning away from EU matters, the First Minister has rightly mentioned the prospects for employment in Wales following our leaving the EU, and he will be aware that the Welsh Government is currently sitting on a decision in relation to the Circuit of Wales. There was a problem in relation to this over the size of the guarantee which would be required for funding the project. Now I understand that's been reduced to less than 50% of the total, so it doesn't seem to be any reason why we can't move swiftly to a decision to to give this guarantee so this huge job-making project can go ahead. So could the First Minister please tell me where we've got to on this at the minute?
The Economy Secretary will be making an announcement on the Circuit of Wales next week.
Oh, right. Well, I'm delighted to hear that because it is vitally important for the whole of South East Wales and indeed far beyond. This is the biggest regeneration project that we've seen in many, many years, £380 million. And I don't expect that the First Minister can anticipate the Cabinet Secretary's forthcoming announcement, but I hope he will accept from me that it is vitally important that the Welsh Government gives the go-ahead to this project.
Well, all these factors will be taken into consideration. I assume I will have a heads up before the decision is taken. I'm sure I will. But the Economy Secretary, I know, will be making an announcement next week on the progress of this scheme.
The Ceidwadwyr Cymreig, Andrew Arty Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you earlier alluded to the fact that you and the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs met with the farming unions and other businesses from the rural communities yesterday. In questions 2 weeks ago, the Cabinet Secretary said that she did not believe that farmers, and this is a direct quote, were perhaps the best people to run businesses. Do you actually believe that is the case, that farmers aren't the best people to run their own businesses?
Well, that's not what she said, and I can say that the event yesterday was hugely successful. We emphasised to the sector, first of all the environmental sector, that all those environmental laws that are already in Welsh law will remain. Secondly, as far as farming is concerned, just to emphasise the point that there is no such thing as British agricultural policy. It's entirely devolved, and so there were opportunities for the farming industry to work with us as to what a future funding scheme might look like, what support they may want in the future. Although, of course, that depends on the money being made available from the UK government to provide that support. And thirdly, of course, in terms of fisheries, what should be done with with Welsh territorial waters in terms of who should be able to fish in them. And secondly, whether Welsh boats wanted us to negotiate with other administrations in terms of obtaining fishing rights for them in other waters.
First Minister, the quote I gave you was a direct quote from the record of proceedings here, and I do note that you didn't distance yourself from that quote. Oh. If I could also ask you a question on the letter that you released on the day of the referendum of the 23rd of June in relation to the agreement that you have with the Liberal Democrats, and in particular the assertion made by Kirsty Williams that the implications had significant budget implications over the 9 education commitments that were made between you and the Liberal Democrats. What is the totality of the commitment that you have given in financial terms to meet the commitment that you made to the Liberal Democrats that brought them into government? I do believe that's a reasonable question because, as I said, the words that were quoted in the correspondence say significant budget implications.
Well, wherever there is European funding for a particular project, that project has to be looked at carefully when that European funding comes to an end. I thought that was obvious. That's already been mentioned by the leader of the opposition. Unless that money is made up by the UK government as promised, then it is clear in the future that some schemes will not be able to be funded in the way that we would hope. Now, he's very keen on quotes and quotations this afternoon. Let me just offer up some to him. 2nd of March, Andrew Arty Davies speaking on the Wales report. I can guarantee that a UK government would make sure that money would be redistributed around the regions of the UK. Otherwise, it would be failing in its remit to deliver help and support to the nation, he means the UK by that, it is elected to govern. Frankly, we cannot continue with Operation Fear, driving people into the ballot box because you are scaring them into voting one way. June the 14th. Campaigners for a Leave vote have said the money Wales gets from Brussels will be maintained by the UK government in the event of Brexit. I welcome that. Andrew Arty Davies said, today's announcement is hugely welcome and is further evidence that Wales will be better off out of the European Union. Despite the First Minister's fantasy claims, we now know that funding for each and every part of the UK, including Wales, would be safe if we vote to leave. June the 21st, Andrew Arty Davies told the Herald Wales could be as much as £500 million a year. Better off if the UK votes to leave the European Union on Thursday. Yes. Senior government ministers have already pledged to maintain existing EU funding if we vote to leave, and additional funding, a Barnett share of £9.8 billion that Wales could receive if we left the EU. And today, he told the media that it wasn't about money, it was about outcomes. Now, the question for him is this. Does he believe that every single penny
that has been lost to Wales should be made up by the UK government? Does he stand by his quotations, and he's keen on quotations today, or is he running away from them this morning?
It's quite remarkable that you've wasted so much of your time, but I'm quite happy that you're using my quotes because you've got so little to say, First Minister. I stand by my quotes, and I'm quite happy to put that on the record. I'm quite happy to debate with you anytime, any place, First Minister, on the benefits that I see as the people endorsed that at the ballot box on the referendum on June the 23rd. I find it absolutely amazing, after two very clear questions, one, to distance yourself from a Cabinet Secretary who has ridiculed farmers' business acumen, and two, over the deal that you have struck with the Liberal Democrats to bring them into government that, in their own words, has significant budget implications for your government. I don't think those are outlandish questions to put in First Minister's questions, because in the campaign, you did say for every new budget commitment that was made by your government, there would have to be cuts elsewhere. So 9 weeks now after the election, it's not unreasonable for the leader of the Conservatives in the Assembly here to ask you the question, right, you've committed this money to the Liberal Democrats' commitments. Where are you getting that money from? It's not to do with the Brexit vote. It's a commitment you made prior to the Brexit vote, because these discussions were prior to the Brexit vote. So where is the money coming from to meet the significant financial commitments that you have agreed with the Liberal Democrats going forward? Could we have a simple, straightforward answer, or is it quite simply you don't know?
Can I quote a good Belfast phrase at him? He is living in a world of sweetie white mice. Because I tell you what, if he thinks that somehow he can get away from the fact that he has failed the people of Wales today by saying he will not fight for every single penny to be made up to Wales, he had the opportunity to declare his position, he failed to do it. He's right to point out there will be budget difficulties. That's true, because we will be losing EU money. £650 million a year is going to be lost to our budget as a result of Brexit. Now, if all that money is made up as he promised 3 times by the UK government, now that will help. Now, the question for him is this: will he stand by the people of Wales, or will he run away from the mess that he's created?
Cwestiwn 3, Siân Gwenllian.
A newch chi ddatganiad am gyflwr cyfleustera meddygfeydd yng Ngogledd Cymru?
Wel, dros y ddeng mlynedd diwethaf, mae nifer o gyfleusterau gofal sylfaenol newydd wedi cael eu hagor ar draws y Gogledd, ac wrth gwrs maen nhw'n darparu adeiladau o'r safon uchelach I feddygon teulu.
Mae yna sefyllfa argyfyngus yn bodoli yn fy etholaeth I, sef y meddygfa Waun Fawr, a hoffwn dynnu'ch sylw at y problemau dybryd sydd yn fanno, a gofyn I chi ymyrryd, gan fod y mater yn rhyglu mlaen ers 10 mlynedd erbyn hyn. Mae'r meddygfa'n rhoi gofal gwych I dros 5,000 o gleifion, ond mae'r adeilad yn hollol anaddas, does am digon o le, mae cyfrinachedd a diogelwch cleifion dan fygythiad, a does dim modd i'r practis gymryd myfyrwyr meddygol nag ehangu gwasanaethau. 10 mlynedd yn ôl, fe ddudodd y Bwrdd Iechyd fod gwella meddygfa Waun Fawr yn flaenoriaeth, ond yw'r cyfleustera heb wella. Ydych chi'n credu fod y llusgo traed yma yn dderbyniol, ac oherwydd fod Bwrdd Iechyd Prifysgol Betsi Cadwaladr mewn mesura arbennig, a wnewch chi ymyrryd mwyn symud pethau ymlaen ar frys?
Mae'r aelod yn iawn ynglyn â sefyllfa yn y Waun Fawr. Mae yna bwysau mawr yna. Wy'n deall bod y feddygfa ei hunan yn trafod y peth yn fanwl iawn gyda'r Bwrdd Iechyd. Mae rhaid datrys y broblem o'r gynted sy'n bosib. Wy'n deall hynny. Wrth gwrs, bydde rhaid cael cais o'r feddygfa yn y tro cynta, ond I wneud hynny, wrth gwrs, mae rhaid trafod y peth gyda'r Bwrdd Iechyd mwyn sicrhau bod y cais yn un iawn. Ond wy'n gwybod bod y Bwrdd Iechyd yn deall y sefyllfa a deall bod rhaid I sicrhau mwy o le i'r feddygfa yn y pen draw. Wy'n deall taw siop o feddygfa'r un adeg, bod yna 5,000 o bobl yn cael ei gwasanaethu o'n nawr, 1,000 ar y dechrau, so felly, mynd amlwg bod rhaid datrys y broblem o'r gynted sy'n bosib.
Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. Well, after the loss of dozens of community beds in North Wales, despite bed occupancy levels of 95% or above, NHS staff in North Wales told me that new community beds would take pressure off general hospitals and enable the Health Board to use its resources more efficiently. How, therefore, do you respond to this statement by GPs at the Royal College of General Practitioners event in the Assembly a fortnight ago, that community beds add to the breadth of things a GP can do, and that local care in a GP unit in community hospitals, enabling them to then discharge people home, prevent the need to put people into general hospitals and assist secondary and primary care.
This does happen, of course, in many parts of Wales, particularly in parts of rural Wales. It's important, of course, that each health board considers the right model for its area. I'm aware, I've seen examples myself of how this operates well. We should not, of course, use that as a reason not to ensure that people can go home with the right support as quickly as possible. But the model that the member talks about already exists in many parts of Wales.
Cwestiwn 4, Neil Hamilton.
What is the Welsh Government doing to support library services in Mid and West Wales?
Well, in 2016 to 17, we will provide over £600,000 of grant funding to support the modernisation of 3 libraries in Mid and West Wales.
I don't know whether the First Minister is aware that Powys County Council plans £250,000 in cuts to the library budget between now and 2019, which will involve cutting half the local running costs of the library service and the possible closure of 11 branch libraries. Will the First Minister join me in regretting this sense of priorities? Because libraries must surely be regarded as a vitally important part of the wider education service in this country.
It is a matter, of course, for local authorities as to how they organise their library services, though I am aware that one of the libraries that will receive money is Brecon Area Library in order to modernise it. But it is for local authorities to decide how they provide library services.
Eluned Morgan.
First Minister, as you'll know, library services are a valued community asset, so much so that in Narberth and also in Newport in Pembrokeshire, local communities are working with Pembrokeshire County Council to keep libraries open as a community-managed resource in the face of Tory austerity cuts. Would you join me in thanking those volunteers for their efforts in supporting the remaining opening of those libraries, and in particular to thank them in those rural areas that do need that extra support?
Yes, I would join the member in thanking those people. I've seen an example of it myself in Britton Ferry, where volunteers are now running the library, and I know that the library service is... one of the stories I was told there is that people are now more likely to use the library. Some people thought the library had closed years ago. And hugely important then that volunteers were able not just to ensure the library continued running, but also to ensure that knowledge about the library was more widespread in the community.
Angela Burns.
First Minister, during the week that we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Somme, it is vital that we celebrate the important role that county archive services play, particularly in helping today's generation keep in touch with their past. First Minister, I'm sure that you are aware that Carmarthen's archive is currently being restored, having been severely damaged due to poor housing in an inadequate building that allowed valuable documents to be covered with mould and have all sorts of other unfortunate things be visited upon them. Will you join with me in welcoming the restoration of this important cultural archive in Wales? And will you outline what your government is doing to help other libraries, other valuable archives in Wales to be restored and kept for the future of the nation? Well,
I can say that the example that the member gives has been helped by funding from Welsh Government. Yeah. And another example I can offer is the relocation of the Gwent archives in Ebbw Vale, brand new building, a hugely important resource, and the resource is particularly accessible, part, of course, of the redevelopment of the old steelworks site.
Cwestiwn 5, Mike Hedges.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on proposed social housing development in this Assembly term?
Well, we continue to invest in social housing, which will be an important element of our target of 20,000 affordable homes in this term, and we are supporting both local authorities and housing associations in order to meet that target.
Can I first of all thank the First Minister for that response? I believe in the importance of social housing. I have many of my constituents on the Council House waiting list at the moment. I also want to stress the importance of ending the right to buy so the Council is able to build again without the fear that those houses will be sold very, very quickly. Can some of the funding currently given to housing associations to build new properties be given to councils to support council house building?
Well, I'm keen to avoid this being seen as a competition between local authorities and housing associations. They're both crucial to the delivery of our new target.
We want to see, of course, more ambition from local authorities when it comes to house building. It is difficult because local authorities were prevented from building houses for so many years. But we are working with both the local authorities and housing associations to develop a delivery plan.
Bethan Jenkins.
First Minister, a cap on housing benefit at local housing allowance rates will apply from April 2018, but only to tenancies signed after April 2016. This reform is better intended to align the rules in the private and the social rented sectors, but it will lead to prospective tenants experiencing further issues of affordability if they are in receipt of benefits or require welfare support in the future. This is something that Community Housing Cymru are very animated about at the moment. In light of the UK Government's decision, what plans does the Welsh Government have to ensure that continued provision of supported housing to some of the most vulnerable people in society?
Well, we want to ensure, of course, that those who are most vulnerable do not suffer as a result of decisions taken elsewhere. And I know the Minister is actively looking at the current situation in order to mitigate any impact on those most vulnerable.
Susie Davis.
Llywydd. First Minister, while we all agree that more houses are needed in Wales, my constituents in communities like Penllygau, Pontarddulais and Gorsainan are not persuaded that the Council's draft local development plans reflect the need for provision for the right houses in the right places to reflect the needs of people during different times in their lives. So can you confirm firstly that in building council houses, local authorities will be bound in the same way as any developer to give strong due regard to the concerns of local residents about locations? And secondly, what are you doing at the moment to help councils look forward to providing more homes for older people when they're planning council house building in the future?
Councils, of course, will be planning according to the demographic change. We know that historically, for many, many decades, houses were built on the basis they were going to house families. We know that there are increasingly more and more people who are on their own. They've been hit hard, of course, by the bedroom tax, particularly in rural Wales, where one-bedroom accommodation is hard to find outside towns. In relation to the first point, of course, councils are bound by their own local development plan, and they must abide by that plan just as any other developer would.
Dawn Bowden.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, during questions to the Cabinet Secretary last month, I was able to highlight a report from Sheffield Hallam University which identified the disproportionate adverse impact of Tory government welfare benefit cuts on poorer communities, with particular reference to limiting the local housing benefit to the local housing rate. Another proposal under the new arrangements is to raise the threshold below which payment is made at the shared accommodation rate, i.e. that's the lowest rate, from 25 years of age to 35 years of age, effectively making it more difficult, if not impossible, for younger people to afford social housing. Can I urge the First Minister, in any discussions with the UK Government on this issue, to caution against this change, which is already resulting in some Welsh social housing bodies questioning if they can continue to provide social housing for that age group?
Well, it's part of a theme where the younger you are, the more you have to pay. Whether if it comes to housing benefit, if it comes to access to housing, if it means getting your foot on the mortgage ladder, there's never been a more difficult time. I had it easy in my generation, as did my parents. But now it's much, much more difficult for young people. I think we have to make a point that more needs to be done to help young people to get into accommodation. That means not discriminating against them because of their age. We see it the same way in the minimum wage. Surely if somebody does a job of work, they should be paid the same rate regardless of their age.
Cwestiwn 6, Hannah Blythin.
Will the First Minister outline any discussions the Welsh Government has had with key anchor companies such as Airbus following the outcome of the EU referendum?
We're in regular dialogue with anchor companies, and the Economy Secretary met with Airbus last Friday. We will be writing to key companies in Wales, including the anchor companies, with a view to holding a business engagement forum focusing on issues raised by the results.
Thank you, First Minister. As an Assembly member in North East Wales, many of my constituents are employed in large workplaces like Airbus. The vote that leave the EU has not only created uncertainty for these people and their families, but also the many hundreds employed via the supply chain reliant on the aerospace site. Can the First Minister assure the workforce and their families that this government will fight both for their future livelihoods and the industrial jewel in the crown of North Wales?
I can give that absolute assurance. I know how important Airbus is as an employer in Wales.
And I know particularly at Broughton, with the thousands that are employed there, that they will be uncertain about the future, as are all manufacturers in Wales at the moment. They are waiting to see what the outcome of the negotiations actually is, particularly over access to the single market. If we do not get access to the single market, there are immense difficulties for our manufacturers, and we will work hard to make sure that companies like Airbus continue to benefit from access to a market of 500 million people.
Adam Price.
Well, following on from that point, has the Welsh Government had an opportunity to make an initial analysis, at least, of the relative merits of the various, well, rather bewildering array, possibly, of Brexit options that have been mentioned: Norway, Switzerland, Canada, Singapore, even, bizarrely, and particularly because of the importance of preservation of access to the single market, as he's just said. Has he come to the conclusion, as many in the business community, that EEA EFTA possibly looks the least worst option on the table at the moment?
Well, given the fact that that would ensure access to the single market, and that is the only model that's currently on the table, the answer must be yes. But of course, we have to accept that would involve free movement of people. And of course, we know that many, many people voted on that issue, above the issue of jobs, actually, now on the doorstep, in the referendum a week last Thursday. The difficulty is, at this moment in time, there's no model that's being proposed that would allow access to the single market without there being free movement of people as well. Norway haven't done it. Switzerland haven't been able to do it. It is simply the EEA model. I think the reality is that the UK government has no real idea of what kind of model might work in the future, which shows the uncertainty of the times that we're living in, which is why we want to provide as much certainty as we can from a Welsh Government perspective, and secondly, why certainty needs to be provided as soon as possible at UK level.
Janet Finch-Saunders.
Diolch Llywyd. First Minister, as a constituency member in Aberconwy, I'm only too well aware of the valuable importance of Airbus in Broughton, with the jobs, 6,000 jobs that they provide. And I know in a statement after the referendum result, they did say that they are really looking to constructively work with UK government to provide support for their workers and indeed to carry on with their operations here. How will you, as First Minister, and your Welsh Government provide the assurance that they probably need right now? Have you come up to North Wales and visited Airbus in order to have those senior management level talks so that they do receive that assurance that you will be working equally as hard as UK government to support them?
Well, I met with the President of Airbus in the week of the referendum. I know that the Cabinet Secretary has also met with Airbus, and I have regular meetings with Airbus to listen to their concerns. I mean, all manufacturers are saying to me that they are concerned about access to the single market. They are European operations, and if the UK is outside of the market they sell in, there are consequences for investment in the future. Does it mean they close on overnight? Of course it doesn't. But if you are an international company, you are more likely to invest inside a market than outside it. That's why it's hugely important that we continue to have free access to the single market, tariff-free. I cannot imagine what our Welsh lamb farmers will do if a 15% tariff is imposed on the lamb that they produce and is sold in the European market, which is why, and of course steel as well, the steel tariffs will be even higher. Why it's vitally important that, regardless of the other issues, bearing in mind the way people voted, that access to the single market without tariffs remains.
David Rowlands.
Diolch, Lewis. Would the First Minister confirm, and I'm not implying in any way that you were involved, that during the 1970s, France and Britain cooperated to build Concorde? I believe it was called Entente Cordiale, and well before we became members of the EU. The inference of this is, of course, that matters at Airbus will continue unabated, and that this debate now is another example of scaremongering, which we had both before Brexit and is now carrying on after Brexit.
I can absolutely assure the member I had nothing to do with Concorde. Its maiden flight occurred when I was 2. So I can say that. But bear in mind, of course, that Concorde was an example of UK and French cooperation that was a failure. Actually, as a project, it didn't work. It never worked on a commercial basis. But he has to bear in mind that the UK was desperate to join the common market in 1973. Desperate to join. because the UK economy was in a weak state. Now, this idea that somehow the UK was forced against its will to join is just simply wrong. It was desperate to join for many, many years. Of course, there'll be cooperation. We understand that. All of a sudden, the drawbridge isn't going to be pulled up. But we have to understand that we are part, at the moment, of a market of 500 million people. If we have to pay a price to enter that market, then our manufacturers will pay a price to enter the market, and ultimately there'll be a price in terms of jobs. And that's the last thing, surely, that anybody wants to see.
Question 7, Jane Bryant.
Will the First Minister make a statement on European regulations relating to air pollution post-Brexit?
Well, it's right to say that EU directives have driven much of our air quality legislation. We will look at these on a case-by-case basis once we've agreed the negotiating position for withdrawal, but local air quality management is driven by the Environment Act 1995.
Thank you, First Minister. European environmental protections must not be sacrificed. There is no doubt that we cannot afford a future UK government to weaken these limits. While the regulations remain outside the EU, we will lose the vital enforcement that EU law provided. Air pollution and climate change are serious issues, not just for this generation, but for future generations. Following the referendum result, will the Welsh Government do all that it can to enshrine these environmental protections and ensure that these rules are enforced?
Well, as I said earlier on, what is already transposed into Welsh law will remain in Welsh law. It's a matter then for the Welsh Government and, of course, the Assembly to decide which laws should then remain. But it's worth pointing out that it's been European incentives that have enabled the UK to clean up its act. The UK had a bad reputation environmentally as a source of acid rain. I grew up in Bridgend, where the River Ogmore literally ran different colours according to what had been thrown into it upriver from some of the factories and, of course, in the mines that existed upriver. I saw it run red, green, black, name any colour. It doesn't happen now. It's a river you can see the bottom of now, and the Taff, as we know, has a salmon run that goes up it. That would have been unthinkable 30 years ago, as the river was so polluted. And much of that drive has actually come from Europe in order to make sure that the UK caught up with the rest. And what I want to make sure is we don't lose the drive that has existed for the past 30 years.
Mohammed Ashka.
Madam Presiding Officer, both Conservative and Labour governments have recognized the need to legislate to improve air quality by introducing measures to control and reduce pollution. Many of these measures were passed before we joined the European Union. For example, the Clean Air Act of 1956 and 1968. Does the First Minister agree it is inconceivable that any future UK government will take action to reverse any current EU regulation in place to regulate air quality in Wales?
I don't think it's inconceivable, given what I've heard about fracking and open cast mining. I don't believe it is inconceivable. When the Clean Air Act came in, because people were literally dropping dead in London because of toxic fogs in that city. There wasn't much choice other than to introduce legislation at that stage. But certainly in the 1980s, our rivers were still... There was a river in Yorkshire which would catch fire if you threw a match into it. We had rivers in Wales that were hugely polluted. Our beaches weren't clean. Our air quality was very, very poor. All that has improved hugely over the past 30 years, and we have been driven in that direction, actually, by the European Union. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it ourselves. And I intend to make sure that the environment the people of Wales have come to enjoy, the environment that people have come to deserve, will remain that way in the future. Not go back to the days when I was a young lad, when the rivers were polluted, when there were tips everywhere until they were cleared away, and people expected things would remain that way. Not so. We are a country now where we can be proud of our environment.
Michelle Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, given that the pollution created by shipping is 260 times that produced by all the world's cars, and that action is required on a global level instead of a continental one, what discussions has the First Minister had with the International Maritime Organisation and others in an effort to seriously address the global air pollution problem?
Well, the reality is, of course, that international trade is such that it means that goods will move around the world. We are hugely reliant in Wales on exports. The last thing we would want to do is to restrict our ability to export. Of course, we want to source as locally as possible where that can be done. Our procurement strategy reflects that.
Question 8, Rhiannon Passmore.
Will the First Minister outline the risks to the Welsh economy if the UK Government does not guarantee every penny of funding which the EU currently provides Wales?
it would mean that £650 million per annum would be lost in terms of government spending, including £260 million in farming subsidies.
Thank you, First Minister, for that answer. Since 2007, EU projects have created 11,900 enterprises and some 37,000 jobs. This EU funding has helped 72,700 people. 72,700 people into work, helped more than 229,000 people gain qualifications, and has funded 56,000 people into further learning since 2007. Under the current 1.8 billion EU-supported programmes, more than 700 million of EU structural funding has already been committed, and that is just 40% of the total allocation for the 2014-20 period. So can the First Minister state what actions the Welsh Government can take? And we've already heard earlier about R.T. Davies's pledges and guarantees on this front to ensure that the Leavers' pledge that Welsh funding will not be affected is kept, unlike the other broken promises that we've heard of putting an extra 350 million into the NHS. Thank you.
Well, the difficulty is that those who've advocated some of these pledges have run away from them. Throw a brick through the window, then other people pick up the pieces. I expect those people who made those pledges and who may well be in government in London in the next few months to keep to those pledges. That was a vow that was made to the people of Wales and indeed in other countries and indeed regions of England. I cannot think of anything that would bring politics more into disrepute if politicians say, on the one hand, every single penny will be guaranteed, and then turn around and say, we didn't mean that. We didn't mean that. That would mean a breach of the most fundamental pledge made to the people of Wales, and the people of Wales will hold those people to account.
Ac yn ôl ar Rhun ap Iorwerth.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llywydd. Dwi'n falch bod Llywodraeth wedi rhoi ymrwymiad i ddatblygu cynllun busnes ar ddeoli Pont Britannia. Dwi'n meddwl bod ni'n disgwyl datblygiad ar hynny yn fuan, ond mae hwnnw'n brosiect y gallan ni fod wedi disgwyl gwneud cais am arian Ewropeaidd fel cyfraniad tuag ato fo, oherwydd pwysigrwydd yr A55 fel rhan o'r rhwydwaith drafnidiaeth Ewropeaidd. Gai ofyn be ydi barn y Prif Weinidog ynglyn â'r posibilrwydd o golli y ffynhonnell yna o arian rwan, ac yn eitho roi ymrwymiad i bwyso ar Lywodraeth Prydain os ydy'r ffynhonnell yn cael ei cholli i sicrhau bod yr arian yn dod fel rhan o bosib o ryw Marshall Plan ar gyfer economi Cymru da ni wedi grybwyll fel plaid.
Wel, y arian Marshall Plan o'r Unol Daleithiau, ond na fi'n deall y pwynt, sicrhau, wel, wedi gweud sawl gwaith, sef dyle pob cinog sy'n cael ei golli, cael ei wneud lan gan rhywna, yna addo bydde hwnna'n digwydd. Ond hwnna'n meddwl byddai'r arian yn dod. Wel, ni wedi clywed oedd bobl oedd yn dadle dilniadau yr Undeb Ewropeaidd, wedon nhw bydde llwyth o arian ar gael. Wel, gan i weld ble mae'r arian yna, felly ynglyn â Chymru, a sicrhau ta bobl Cymru, sydd yn penderfynu am ha ffordd mae'r arian yn cael ei hyla. Ond lan i nawr, wrth gwrs, ni gyd ni wedi clywed yw bobl yn tynnu nôl o'r addewid hynny. A fel mae fe, wrth gwrs, yn grif o'r blaid, y dylen ni i ymladd dros Gymru a nid ymladd yn erbyn Cymru. Yna beth ni wedi clywed yn y siambr un wrth rai prynawn yma. Diolch,
Prif Weinidog. Ni nawr yn symud ymlaen i'r cwestiwn brys dwi wedi dderbyn o dan reol sefydlog 12.66, a dwi'n galw ar Simon Thomas i ofyn y cwestiwn brys.
Diolch, Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, yn dilyn datganiad Llywodraeth y Daenes Gyfunol ynghylch dyfodol dynasyddion i'r Undeb Ewropeaidd sydd yn byw yn y Daenes Gyfunol, a wnewch chi ddatganiad am safbwynt Llywodraeth Cymru?
Wel, mwyn ail ddweud, wrth gwrs, beth wedys i yn gynharach, sef, wrth gwrs, wedi ysgrifennu'r ysgrifennydd cartref mwyn sicrhau bydd hi'n cadarnhau. Bydd Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig yn gadael dinasyddion o'r Undeb Ewropeaidd i aros yn y Deyrnas Unedig yn barhaol, hynny sydd yna yn barod. Ac wrth gwrs, bydd hollol anghywir i weld y bobl hyn fel bobl sydd goffa cael i ddadle amdano, i drafod amdano, yn bwysig dros ben bod gwarad yna yn cael ei rhoi nawr.
Diolch am y cadarnhad hwnnw, Prif Weinidog. Wy'n gobeithio byddwch chi yn cyhoeddi'r llythyr i chi wedi sgwennu at yr ysgrifennydd cartre a'i ateb hithau hefyd at chi. Gweithio beth ni wedi clywed yn y siambr heddi, fe wedodd llyfafydd o fan Theresa May ddoe, wrth esbonio'r safle a mynegwyd yn tir cyffredin, we don't want to give away our negotiating position at the start. Nawr I fi, mae hwn yn swnio fel bod dinasyddion yr Undeb Ewropeaidd yn cael eu trin fel gwefan gwyddbwyll ac yn cael eu symud o gwmpas am resymau gwleidyddol. Mae yna 67,000 o bobl o wledydd yr Undeb Ewropeaidd yn byw yng Nghymru, a 500 ohonyn nhw yn feddygon yn y gwasanaeth iechyd ni. Does dim modd i ni golli'r bobl hyn, a beth bynnag, maen nhw'n fan o'i teuluoedd ni, fan o'r cymunedau ni, fan o'r Gymru fodern. Mae'n warthus bod y bobl hyn yn cael eu trin yn y ffordd sydd wedi cael eu trin yn ystod y wythnos diwetha, oherwydd etholiad tu fewn i un blaid sy'n lleiafrifol yn tir cyffredin. Mae rhaid i ni gyfu neges cadarn o Gymru bod yna croeso i'r bobl yma yn y cymunedau ni, bod ni moyn iddyn nhw aros, bod ni'n mynd i groesawu nhw a gwneud popeth y gallwn ni i ddangos hynny. Oedd yna digwyddiad ar y prom yn Aberystwyth dydd Sadwrn, dwi'n gwybod os welswch chi fe ar y cyfryngau, gath ddim lot o sylw, ond oedd yna 400 o bobl yno yn sefyll yn gadarn ochr yn ochr, a ffoaduriad, pobl o Dainas, gwledydd eraill, a bawb sydd wedi dod i Gorllewin Cymru.
Na, fe wedys i hwnna, a unwaith tog, like garanhau bod yn bwysig dros ben, achos fi wedi clywed bobl yn sôn am hwn, o'n i yn Llanelli, a chythau wrth gwrs. Wrthos diwetha yn clywed pryderon bobl fyna, a fe glywes i'r un peth yn Abertawe. A mae'n bwysig dros ben bod yna gadarnhad gan Lywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig, a bydd y bobl sydd yma nawr yn gallu aros. Mae rhai yn dadle, maen nhw'n gallu aros yn barod, ond dyn nhw wedi clywed hynny o Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig sy'n gwneud y penderfyniadau hyn. Nid rhywbeth i drafod yw hwn, mae hwn yn rhywbeth sydd eisiau sicrhau nawr mwyn sicrhau bod bobl yn dal i feddwl bod yna groeso i nhw yng Nghymru ac yn y Deyrnas Unedig. Nid felly mae pethau ar hyn o bryd, a mae fe a Fynedd, wrth gwrs, wedi clywed tystiolaeth ynglyn â hwnna dros yr wythnos diwetha.
Jenny Rathbone.
I spent part of yesterday morning trying to remove a racist slogan from somebody's front door. And unfortunately, these sort of incidents are not isolated. What do you think the government can do to try and tone down the levels of hatred that this Brexit vote seems to have unleashed, as well as ensuring that we get full cooperation of local authorities, the police and the voluntary sector to ensure these things are stamped out and are deemed to be unacceptable?
Well, I mean, my comment last week was quite simply this. All countries have their idiots and Wales has its share, unfortunately. I was too generous to these people in the way I described them, I believe now, but there we are. I have to be diplomatic in my job as best I can. The reality is, I heard people who were very afraid last week, people who'd lived in the UK for generations, actually, because they looked different. Therefore, they were a target. We have been in contact with the police and crime commissioners to make sure that the police are aware of what's happening. The police are certainly very keen to emphasise the fact that people should report hate crimes. They will, of course, then take action. And the message has to be got out there that we will not accept this kind of hatred in our society. That we cannot be tolerant of intolerance. What has been let out of the bottle is going to be difficult to control, but it must be controlled for the good of our society.
Diolch, Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem